You're right. The mic's not on. You're right. The mic's not on. All right. That should be better. Let me know. Make sure you guys can hear it. And we'll be ready to go. I hate the delay. Literally, I'm waiting for you to respond to something I said like 10 seconds ago. Okay. All right. Good. Let's go. All right. So I said we talk about the essay stuff, so we're going to do that first. There seem to be a couple different questions of various types of things that people are concerned about, which is fair play. That makes sense to me. All right. So I got my chat over here. I got my OBS open over here. I think we're in decent shape. Okay. All right. So let's go with this. Yeah, let's go with this. Okay. So what we've got is I want to talk a little bit about sort of what the written section is, how the written section is going to work, things you want to keep in mind, and just raw advice. So this is going to be strategy. It's not going to be like what to do. It's going to be when to do what. All right. So remember the essay, the way it breaks down is as follows. I'm just zooming in to fill the screen here. The way it breaks down is as follows. Number one, you've got, well, all the writing sections. You've got two broad sections on the test. The first half of the test and the second half of the test. The first half, which we're going to call part one for now, that's going to be the first sit down. Is you sit down for your multiple choice, you have your 55 minutes, you get that done, it's done. Then you transition into the SAQ, which again, you can't take time from multiple choice and save it for the SAQ. That's not a thing. So spend the full 55 minutes on the multiple choice. That is the way it is. And then you'll be asked to do the SAQ. Now, the SAQ section, as you can see, gives you 40 minutes. Now, what they expect you to do is do 3 questions in 40 minutes. That gives you about 12 and a half minutes per question, give or take. So you got to really think about that, right? Okay, so like what and how are you going to handle it? This is not a section where I want you to spend a great deal of time prepping. There's no time to prep. Remember, you also have a bounded box of paper. You can only write so much for each of the SAQ questions. I absolutely want you to answer in a format that is consistent with what we talked about in class, which was having an A, B, C format to match each of the questions. And I'll show you some examples of what that looks like in some student samples on these questions in a minute. Now, I did ask you to do question 3 and 4 tonight, so that should be done. So take that out if you have it. We're going to use that as a reference to talk about SAQs and how it should be done. Now, the first question and the second question will both have documents. They're mandatory. You have to do them. And then what you'll get is you'll get a third page that says question 3 or question 4, and you have to designate that. The way you designate that is there's a bubble on the top of the page for question 3 or question 4. Do not forget to put in which bubble matches the question you're choosing. If your stupid butt turns around and takes question 3, writes down question 3, and bubbles question 4, you've got a 0 because you just said I'm answering question 4, but you wrote down the answers for question 3. You have to write in the right test or the right question. So again, it's going to be 2 bubbles on the top of the page. You cannot miss them. Question 3 or question 4, and you bubble it in like a Scantron bubble, which one you're doing. So do make sure that's the case. Don't bubble in anything until you're certain that that is the answer you're committing to. So for example, you might turn onto this page and be like, wow, man, I know China. Malvagno only talks about China. It's like the course basically was Chinese history. All right, you say that. But then you get in there and you realize that you really have no idea what a continuity is or how to say it because it's one of the harder skills. So then you're like, okay, you've bubbled in 3, you're good to go, you're doing your thing, and then you realize halfway through the SAQ page that, geez, I don't know if I really know the answer to this. Remember, there's no extra pages. You can cross out and start over, but you lose all that space on the page. So you got to be a little bit thoughtful when it comes to your options on the SAQ. So the options are question 3 or question 4. So you do want to make double careful sure when you make your choice that this is the one I want to do. I really do feel good about it. You can write on the paper. You're going to have a lot of this blank space. So make sure you do that and do a minute or two of just plotting and planning about, all right, what am I going to say here for an answer? Now, speaking of answers, I asked you to do these two questions, so let me pull up the answers for these two questions. So, AP World, here we go. And you were doing 2021. And SAQ sample response 3. Okay. So these are actual student responses. I'm scrolling down through this. First off, notice the way the student did it. Right off the bat, the format's correct. A, B, C. Super clean, super clear. If you're wondering where's the line paper, that's removed by the scanning software. So in other words, you're not going to get a box with empty line, like an empty box of this. You're going to have lines on it, just so you know. All right. They remove that when they scan it in. Again, you'll see the ABC format, and then you'll see a kid ABC format. Now, in general terms, all these students fill in their pages, right? All of them do the job. So we're going to kind of just take a couple of samples here and just look and see what they did. So the question was, identify one continuity in the political system of China in the period 1200 to 1750. B, identify one change in the political system in China from the period 1200 to 1750, and explain one way in which political continuity is in China. So we'll do one question at a time. Let's just do it that way. So identify one continuity. So what is a continuity? So remember first off that every question on the exam, whether it's multiple choice, SAQ, essay, doesn't matter. They're going to be testing the historical skills. That is always what's at play here. The skills are context, historical situation, which is usually document related and is very similar to context, but they're sometimes slightly different. But context, purpose, point of view. It could be similarities or differences, which is comparison. It could be causation, which is cause and effect. And then continuity or change. Those are your skills. Now, there are document analysis skills embedded in that, like purpose, audience. What is the author trying to prove? What could you do with this? What does this basically mean? What is this saying? We've done a lot of those questions. So that's every question is like that. So you can see they highlighted and underlined the word continuity, and they expect that to be the answer. Okay, so I just want to make sure that nobody's actually writing anything in chat. It seems like the last thing anybody wrote was "I can hear" by Sam, so I'm just assuming that's true. If the chat's doing other things and moving, let me know, but I assume that's it. It just stopped, so I want to make sure. Okay, so what is a continuity versus a change? So change and continuity is the opposite concepts. Change, I think, is pretty easy. Continuity is pretty hard. Continuity is the idea that in the turn of history, in the roll of history, most things should change, right? Change is a powerful force. Lots of things in the world's changing. You're changing. We're all changing. Everything's changing all the time. So if things don't change, that's really notable. Like, changes are important, but change is expected. Continuity is not so expected. So continuity is what are the things that, despite the fact that there are incredible pressures and forces in the world for change in any society, why do these things, like whatever these things are, why do these things resist such changes? That's the idea of a continuity. So what are the things that, in spite of all the pressures to change, stay the same? So, like, for example, I can show a picture of you or take you back to when you were, like, I don't know, 6th grade, 7th grade. Pick your time period. And I can show you a picture and go, all right, what's changed about you? And you can give me a whole bunch of stuff. And then I can say, all right, what changed about your personality? And you can give me a whole bunch of stuff. What changed about your taste in music or movies? And you can give me a whole bunch of stuff. If I then said to you, hey, listen, what are the things that whether you're 2, whether you're 12, whether you're 15, whether you're 55, you're pretty certain are always going to be the same about you? And don't do surface level. Don't do my eyes will always be green. Nuh-uh. What are the things about you that are going to resist all the pressures of life that causes us to change? Whatever those are your continuities. So continuities are elements of a society that resist the natural forces in the world for change. So that can be hard to identify, because what students end up doing is they go, China was doing this and they still were doing that later on. That's not actually an answer, okay? That's that surface level, not good enough response. So you need to make sure your continuities, whenever this is asked of you, are things that are significant because they resist change. Now, having said that, what kind of answers could we use for a question like 3A? We are identifying one continuity in the political system of China from 1200 to 1750. Well, you're not limited to things that are only continuous from that time period. In other words, I could say something like China's historical association, roots, and cultural attitudes developed from Confucianism remained a continuous part of the political system of China. Yeah, Mandate of Heaven's a good example for that, but to do that, you're going to have to describe that process. So, say I'm asked, can I use Mandate of Heaven for 3A? Sure. If you're going to say Mandate of Heaven, you would say the Mandate of Heaven, and if you use such a term, you should define it. The concept that the heavens or the gods or whatever bestow upon a Chinese dynasty the right to rule and demonstrate that through good, positive, visible effects in society was a continual part of the Chinese political system. You could talk about how China remains an autocratic state run by an emperor. Okay, you could talk about the importance of Confucian scholarship as it goes throughout this time period. So there's a lot of things you can do. Now, what did our sample students do? I don't know. Let's have a look. Okay. So I'm going to tell you right now, the first example is almost always a correct answer, no matter what. In other words, they almost always give you the first example is usually full credit. The second example is usually some credit. And the third example is some but limited credit. So we'll see how they did. Okay, one continuity of the political system of China was Confucianism. Notice the immediate answer, the identify, here's an answer, full stop. Is that sufficient information to get the question right? No. You need to say how that is a continuity. So what separates that from an explanation? Let me give you a secret. Do not ever try to write a difference between an identify and an explanation. How about this? Treat every question like an explanation. It doesn't hurt you to do that. And it solidifies that your answer will be correct if your information is correct. So treat every answer as though it requires the same level of detail, analysis, and so on, as if it asked you to explain. So don't just provide answers at the identify level and be, that's like good enough. That's so stupid. That's such a bad idea. Explain everything. That's the right way to do it. Explain everything. So this kid's doing it right so far. They gave a full answer. Cool. Now let's make sure the answer is correct. Why is this thing the correct answer? This is because, now I made the mention to you guys before about the importance of the word because, how because is a very powerful word. Because is what you call a conjunction, but it's a conjunction that leads to the hows and the whys of any particular issue. And that's why it's so powerful, because for our course, really the hows and the whys are where everything is that we do. This is because it was the principle of its imperial bureaucracy. That's true. Now, could a student stop there? Because obviously that's like another question here, right? How far do I have to go? I know that students have a few sort of thoughts in their head about things like this. Like, okay, you could read this whole answer, like, I know it's right, but at what point was the student right? At what point did the student solidify their point and they didn't need to go any further? Because that's actually an important thing to know. It's important to know when you've achieved a thing, when you feel confident that your effort has resulted in the point gain that you were looking for. Because for one, you don't want to waste time on things that aren't going to help you. And number two, you want to be able to say to yourself, okay, I've accomplished the task. I would say right after that word bureaucracy, they'd be just fine. They'd be just fine. One continuity of the political system of China was Confucianism. This is because it was the principle of its imperial bureaucracy. I feel like that'd be 100% fine, exactly like that as is. And then the kid carries on, and even when the Manchu takeover, and even when I guess the kid meant took over, and even when the Manchu takeover, the civil service exam and Confucianism is still there. This shows how China continued to be an imperial bureaucracy even when new people came to power. Okay, so this student goes well beyond the identify standard. Nothing here is wrong. Everything here is correct. It's perfectly fine. Definite correct answer. Again, I would stop comfortably after bureaucracy and feel like the students accomplished the job. Let's go to the next example. Same question. One continuity in the political system of China in the period 1200-1750 was their communist-run government. Okay, so that's wrong. That's wrong. Now, someone in chat, tell me why that's wrong. One continuity in the political system of China in the period 1200-1750 was their communist-run government. Somebody tell me why that's wrong. They got it back. Who's they? What is it? What's the song? No. Yeah, you forgot. Come on. What the hell? Ray's like just throwing it out there. Why is this wrong? This is so freaking obvious why it's wrong. Why is it wrong? Come on, I got 11 dodo birds watching this. Somebody's got to know the answer. What's the issue? Type it in. One continuing the political system of China in the period 1200-1750 was their communist-run government. Didn't they re-implement the exam? I thought that happened. Shh. No. Come on, guys. Read it. There's a massive problem with this statement, for God's sake. You gotta pick this up. You gotta see the problem here. Now, I don't think you're gonna make this kind of a mistake yourselves. Oh, Jesus. Gosh diddly darn it. Exam is an exam. Communism wasn't in China. That's correct. Brandon and Sam are right. There was no communism in China in 1200 to 1750. Karl Marx, I don't know if he was even born by 1750, to be honest with you. Communism comes to China in the 1940s. You got to know. No, why am I talking about B? I'm still on A. I'm doing every A. I read A to you. A. Same for real. Well, wake up. I'll have to tell you. So, watch the screen. You'll see what I mean. No, you don't have to apologize. That's okay. You're not hurting me. So, by 1750, there is no communism. There's no communism for another 200 years plus. So, well, that's not true. I mean, there's communism in 1910. So 150 years. There's no. Could you answer by talking about China's isolationist policy? Okay, so nah. Andrew asked a question that is hard to answer because I don't know what Andrew means. So isolationist Chinese policy would have to be like very specific what you mean. If you mean the limiting of foreign traders to the port of Canton, that's not a thing in 1750. You won't see that until around early 1800s. If you wanted to say something like a continuity in the... And it's got to be political. It's got to be political. So what's the political element of that? You can't say, oh, they didn't want people to trade, so they stuck them in Canton. Even if the time period's right, how's that political? You got to make it political. So this kid's flat out wrong. They have the wrong government system. They never strayed from it far. They believed that it was the best way to govern over the people. That's a classical line of BS. That's the whole poop in your hand, fling it at the wall, and hope it sticks. There is nothing about that sentence that means anything. It's a bunch of platitudes. Oh, it was a nice thing, and then once upon a time, things happened, and it was great, and China was never the same ever again. Like, it's a waste. Like, you're not fooling anybody. One thing you cannot do, well, you can do what you want. One thing that won't work is BSing your way through the paper will not work. It may have worked in other courses. It might work in other disciplines. It will not work in AP. These people have a very, very good nose for BS. If you're writing something that doesn't actually have any meaning, they're going to tell you this doesn't mean anything. You just wrote words. It doesn't mean anything. And that sentence is absolutely full of things that don't mean anything. Aspects may have changed or adapted to, but they never went away with it, for they could best control their people that way. I mean, so this vague notion at the very, very end that you can control people via communism is true. But again, it's got nothing to do with anything. It's quite literally apples and oranges. So that answer is just simply wrong. Let's look at the third example. Answer A, same question, and let's see what they wrote. Now, it's a much shorter answer. It may not look shorter to you, but it's got bigger handwritings. That student is just yapping for real. Yeah, for real. So one continuity in the political system of China in 1200-1750 is the use of the civil service exam. Okay, that, got to be a little careful. Depends what he says. I'm saying he, but depends what he says. This exam could determine one's capability of work in the government. This use continued over time as a way to select new government officials. All right. Why is it a little bit cautious about that answer? So the first thing you should know is, well, what happened in China from 1200 to 1750? Because the next thing is, what are the changes, right? So we did the continuity. The next question is, same time period, what are the changes? Like you see, this kid goes off into Mao, which is, again, insanity. That stuff's not happening yet. So the kid's got good instincts to go with Confucianism. In this case, the civil service exam, which is a sort of branch out of that. However, right around that sort of 1250, 1300 mark, northern China is conquered. And then shortly after that, less than a generation later, the rest of China is conquered by the Mongols. So when the Mongols conquer China, they absolutely remove the civil service exams. Now, they do return, and they're certainly in use by the Ming and the Qing, both of whom fall into this time period. So you can make the case that through a wide swath of the time here, yes, this is a system that is absolutely working in that respect. Like you are actually getting this, you are actually getting the continuity of the civil service exam. Mongol was Yuan dynasty. Yes, the Mongols were known as the Yuan dynasty. That is correct. Now, let's go ahead and notice. Oh, by the way, see the top? Look, see the bubbles? I told you. Like, that's how it looks. They give you a 3 and a 4, and you got a bubble. So make sure you bubble right. Okay, let me go down to the answers. So I'm very confident answer A on question 1 would be getting the points. Answer A on question 2 would not get the points. And what about this one? I think this will get the point. It is true for most of the time period. So let's see what they do. Sample score A got the point. Sample score A did not get the point for 2 because the kid's cracked down on his communism stuff. And this kid does get the point here for the civil service exam as a political continuity. So I want you to see the quality level. To me, this answer, 3A, is a very poor quality. The kid has one strong idea, the political system as a continuity. They link it with one specific piece of example, the civil service exam. And then the exam's purpose, or what it did, is added in as a sort of a qualifier in the last sentence. So a 3-sentence structure like that is very common for good SAQ answers. You get, they sometimes call it the ACE format, ACE. You give an answer, you give your content, and you provide an example. So what's your answer? How do you know it's your answer? And then provide a specific example. In this case, the civil service exam is the specific example because it was a continuity that was used specifically to select government officials. That's the idea. All right, let's go look at question B now. Now, question B was identify one change in the political system. Okay? Actually, let's not do that. Let's go right to C, because C is harder. Explain one way in which political continuities in China influenced the development of the global economy from this period. All right, that's really hard. That's really hard. So you have to explain a way in which political continuities, which, by the way, you were asked to identify 1 in 3A. So if you don't have 1 in 3A, the odds are good you're going to get 3C wrong also, because you have to identify a political continuity for C. Can you use the same continuity as you used in A? You can, as long as you're using it for this new question's purpose. Like, you can use the same rough example. But explain one way in which political continuities in China influenced the development of the global economy. Okay, so the global economy in this time period is going to be moving heavily from Silk Road trade, although it will flourish during the Mongol era. But once the Mongols are gone, it'll move from Silk Road trade to pretty much most goods of value move toward towards the Indian Ocean Trade Network. So a political continuity that influences the global economy would be things like the stability of China provides markets and production for all sorts of goods, and you can name some. Tea, porcelain, silk, whatever you like, that are demanded all over the world, and as a result, because China's political continuities remain, it tends to keep the nation stable, even in the face of crisis like war, and as a result, production continues to happen. Something like that is certainly possible. Let's look and see what kind of answers they give, and we'll decide whether or not they deserve the points. So, here's our first sample. Sorry, wrong thing. I'll go back to the question, and then we'll go to the answers. I don't know why I went down like that. Okay. Okay, so here's sample A, answer C. Now, answer C I would expect to be longer. That makes sense to me. I'm going to zoom in so it's easier for you guys to see it. Here we go. One political continuity of China's involvement in the global economy was state-sponsored exploration. Now, this is going to be, I got to hear this. Because, all right, so the kid's almost certainly going to refer to Zheng He and his travels around the world, at least the Indian Ocean Trade Network, being a kind of ambassador / tribute demander on behalf of China. But again, He was a rarity. He's an exception to the rule. The Chinese are particularly insular. This would not be a continuity, in my opinion. Now, could the kid make the argument in a way that makes it correct? Again, the standard is plausible. So if the answer to this given is plausible, you'll get the point, even if the grader thinks it's wrong. Okay, so one political continuity of China's involvement in the global economy was state-sponsored exploration. This can be seen with Zheng He's explorations, in which he traveled much of the world, which led to global connections and trade. Later, this type of movement is also seen through the protection of the Silk Road and building of the Grand Canal. Okay, these all help facilitate trade and make China prosperous during this period. This shows how the state-sponsored activity allowed China to become economically wealthy through trade. All right, so the kid makes a thesis at the very end. The argument being state-sponsored activities allowed China to become economically wealthy. Is this good? Well, I'm torn because, again, Zheng He is an exception, not the rule, so it wouldn't be a continuity. It also didn't last very long. It certainly didn't last throughout this time period. It lasted for some of his life, and that was it. Then it was dismantled. I would be inclined not to give the points for those reasons. I don't think this kid's picking an example that actually fits the question, but we'll check later on to see if that kid gets the points. I suspect they're going to get the point because this is the first example of the SAQ section, and typically all the kids there get the point. That's why they put them in the first example. But I'm not loving this answer, and if it does get the point, it's pretty damn close. It's cutting the line. Let's look at B. This is our communist kid. One way in which political continuities in China influenced the development of the global economy in this period was how the government continued wanting silver and European goods. All right, so the silver thing is true. European goods, well, it depends what you mean by that, right? So, like, how can I phrase this? Like, the European goods that the Europeans made, they didn't really want. But would they accept Spanish silver? Yes. So there was, you gotta be careful what you mean by European goods. Like, they didn't really want European goods. They did want silver, though. Which meant that overall they continued to trade with the outside world, for they really wanted these goods and services. That's not really true. That's not true. The Chinese had no interest in outside product. And that was not their motivation. That's not true. This developed the global economy because they were participants in trade with other nations. They were bringing their own value to the economy and trading with others back and forth, which boosted the economy overall. All right, so that last sentence is extremely generic, but it feels like I thought the want for silver was later in time. Well, it is later, but so a good question is so of course the silver thing doesn't really start happening in big terms until post-Columbus, right? So that's 1492, which sits right in the middle of this. So a continuity doesn't have to be something that actually lasts the entire time frame. It just has to be a substantial chunk of the time frame. There was a continuity where this occurred. You can do that. Again, I'd be less inclined to give the point, but I could also see them. In fact, I'm willing to guarantee they did it because once more it's the first thing. And I imagine the reason they gave the point in the end is this last sentence really kind of summarizes the correct information while shoving aside the wasted and quiet information. So that's probably good. All right, last one, version C. One-way political continuities in China influenced the development of the global economy in the period 1200 to 1750 is China's contribution to production. Okay, whatever that means. During the period of immense trade, I don't know when they're talking about, China was exporting as many goods as possible to contain mass amounts of silver. China was exporting as many goods as possible to contain. Probably must mean obtain mass amounts of silver. This would give China great wealth and would later influence the economy by the use of banks and new currency. Very generic answer. So these are kind of tough. I mean, in my classroom, I probably would not give any points for the B and C response, but the A response certainly is good. I think so. So this particular question, does it score the points? Well, let's find out. Oh, sorry. So the first one did get all 3 points, as I said it would, and here's why. For explaining state-sponsored activities such as the Chinese government's involvement in the voyages of Zheng He in the protection of the Silk Road and the construction of the Grand Canal influenced the development of the economy. I don't remember the Grand Canal being mentioned. Maybe I missed it, but I don't remember it being mentioned. It might have said canal, but I don't remember the Grand Canal. I'm gonna have a look. So here it is. Zheng He, blah blah blah. I mean, there's nothing here about the Grand Canal. Oh, there it is. There it is. Through the Silk Road, building the Grand Canal. So this is what they say. This is the reason why the person's considered explaining, okay? That they included this part about how movement is seen through this or through that and so on. And the Grand Canal is brought in. This is where they say the actual question is answered from this statement here compared to the rest of the information around it, which, again, sort of checks out. The second response also earned a point, which again I felt like it was weak, by explaining China's government wanted silver and the trade that continued boosted the economy overall. I mean, that is true. We talked about that. The silver thing happens in the middle of this time period. They obviously took it. And that last one, which I said was kind of junk and didn't make much sense and was actually contradictory to truth, well, that was no points. This response did not earn a point because the explanation does not address the political continuity that influences China's role in global trade. Like, don't forget to go back to the answer. Can you talk about the use of the Grand Canal was taxed to use? Yeah, sure. I don't know why. Yeah, I could do that. Wait, oh, you're asking me, can that be the answer? Yes. Can you say using technology like the Grand Canal to spread stuff around China or letting people travel freely and then taxing them to increase government revenue would be a economic booster? Yeah, you could say that. Absolutely. Definitely. All right, so I just wanted to show you the SAQ thing. So that's basically how it works, all right? And you can certainly come in here and look at it yourself to see whether or not these answers you gave are any good. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going over a bunch of SAQs. So why don't we go ahead and transition over to the LEQ and DBQ unless people have a question. Okay, I got nothing. All right, so what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to just go get myself another tea, and I'll be back in 2 minutes, and then we're going to talk about the DBQ, LEQ, and what to keep in mind, how to structure the essay, what makes it good, what makes it bad, etc. All right, so back in just 1 sec while I do that. All right, I'm back. All right, I'm here. Okay. What am I having for tea? I just had Lipton tea. Real basic stuff. Oh, the one that tastes like smoke was Lapsang Souchong. All right. Let's talk about essays. Now, what I'm going to go through with you is the Chief Reader Report. Now, this is deep end information, okay? What this is every year, the Chief Reader of the essay actually, the Chief Grader, excuse me. They're the same thing as Chief. Chief Reader is the person who runs the whole grading system for the AP exam. They do a report. This report is put out to the public, but it's really meant for teachers, okay? And we're supposed to read it, and we're supposed to understand some things about it. First off, take a look at some scoring stats, okay? This is the year you did. So this is not last year, but I want to show you, this is all conversations about the essays in general, okay? So, you can see for yourself that in that year, exam section 2, just so you know, 1 is the DBQ, 2, 3, or 4 are your LEQs. Now, 4 was substantially worse, right? You can see that for yourself compared to any of the other options. So overall, the LEQ is a 2.21 total points out of 6. The DBQ is 2.81 average out of 7. These are the averages. Now remember, a student scoring straight average, is going to get a 2.75, which is a 2. So you want to avoid that. You want to be above average. Now you might say, okay, no one can get a 2.8, right? You either get 2 points or 3 points on the DBQ. Nobody can get a 2.21. You're either getting 2 points or 3 points on the LEQ. Okay, so what you need to make sure is that you're at least a point ahead of the curve. That's sort of the idea. So as I've said many times with the DBQ, you really want to make sure you nail the thesis, you nail the context, and you nail the use of 3 documents. Those are 3 points. If you do those 3 and they're done right, any of the points you get, great. At the very least, you're slightly above average. Puts you in a position for a 3. Now, if you score 5 points on the DBQ, even 4 points on the DBQ, you're putting yourself in a position for a higher grade than a 3. 4 points on a DBQ, plus some good multiple choice and everything else going okay, is probably putting you in a range of a 4. It's not that hard. Well, let me rephrase that. It's very hard, but it's not that out of reach. It's not like, geez, man, if I want to get a 4, I have to do 80% material correct. No, you do not. No, you do not. Okay, so please keep that in mind. All right, now, we're going to look at the Chief Reader Report. And this is the one from that particular year. It doesn't really matter. I just want to show you what they say about the DBQ in general. Okay? Okay. So here's what the Chief Reader says about the DBQ. When I describe what he says to you, as I read what he says to you, I'm going to describe how this translates into a better essay. So, let's start with format, right? First off, number 1, before we do anything else, let's do format. So if I open up Google Docs real quick. Okay, format. What should the essay look like in terms of structure? So I would suggest DBQ or LEQ has the same number of paragraphs. So this is your structure. So we're going to call this essay structure. I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to zoom in. Okay. Essay structure. First thing, paragraph by paragraph. Paragraph 1 needs to be the intro. Inside the intro, you're scoring the following points. The thesis. No, but you could screenshot it. Part of the idea of being here for these is that people should be here for these. So feel free to screenshot it, pause it, steal it, write it yourself, whatever. But no, I'm not going to post it. That's the reward for being here, is that you get to see it. All right, so intro. You get the point of the thesis in the intro. This is for DBQ. I guess we'll start with the DBQ, right? We'll start with the DBQ because it's not going to be the same points for both essays. So the point of the thesis is going to get done in the introduction. A lot of the student samples, I would venture to say all the student samples, are also going to have attempts on context in the intro as well. I've given you my thoughts about that. At this point, you're either going to do what you want to do or you're going to do what I said to do. And I'm not suggesting you have to do what I said to do to get the point. But when it comes to context, some of you have insisted all year long that you're going to put it in the introduction no matter what. Listen, Miss G next year is going to tell you, and she's right, that that's the better way to do it. You should do it that way. That's true. It's allowed for you not to do it that way. You are allowed to take the context and put it in another spot in the paper. I personally prefer that because it serves as a safety check against your own ego. What my fear is if you put the intro, or you put in the intro, the context and the thesis together in one paragraph, my fear is you give me 3/4 of a decent context, half of a decent intro. When you put them together, it looks like a lot because you have a couple of elements in here sitting in one paragraph. You're going to be staring at having near half a page of information, and you're going to feel real confident about that. And instead of being sure you get at least the thesis point, which is the most important point, instead you might actually be in a situation where you are getting neither point because you put in moderate effort into both instead of good effort into each separate section. So there's my caveat. You go with God and do what you want to do. If you get the right categories of investigation, do you lose the thesis point? Yes. A thesis point requires, number one, answer the prompt. Direct answer to the prompt. If the prompt says, and we'll look at a prompt to help you understand. Here. So this is a DBQ prompt, okay? Evaluate the extent to which economic factors led to the outbreak of the Mexican Revolution, 1910 to 1920. Now, this was, I remember this essay very well that year, and I remember my students being like, I don't know anything about the Mexican Revolution. All right, fine. They really don't expect you to know very much, if anything, about the Mexican Revolution. They expect you could read the documents and formulate an argument. That's what they expect. Okay? That's what they expect. So, if you are going to do this essay, when I say in this thing you have to answer the prompt, I mean you need to answer, evaluate the extent to which economic factors led to the outbreak. So what is that extent? I am going to warn you now. A lot, major, huge, great extent is all pretty duh. It has all the feeling of a person who's really unsure about what they're saying or how to say it. I would avoid those traps if at all possible. All right? So what should it look like? Well, let's see what the guy says. The intent of this question was to assess students' ability to articulate and defend an argument based on evidence within historical documents. That's always a DBQ's objective. I'm skimming ahead. Okay. Students were asked to contextualize their essays by providing the larger historical framework within which the Mexican Revolution was situated, which you know that because that's what context actually is. So most responses, students were generally able to evaluate the sources provided to identify the extent of the impact of economic situations on the Mexican Revolution. So they're saying students generally could read the documents and explain the thesis with the documents. That's generally a skill that students demonstrated. And that's that getting that first few points of evidence, just for like having a couple of documents in there. So in the thesis, you're going to answer the prompt. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to invent and provide your own categories of investigation, which is not a phrase you're ever going to see on the test. That's a phrase I invented. But the idea is the same. You need to get in there 3 specific points of evidence, of issue, of consequence that you will be talking about in the course of the essay. So as the essay rolls on, you will be talking about these things. You need to preview it, okay? It's like saying, stay tuned for the news. At 11 tonight, we're covering X, Y, and Z. I need to know what X, Y, and Z are. That gives me a reason to keep reading and watching your program and see what kind of full coverage you give to X, Y, or Z when the time comes. Okay? So those are the 2 things that should be in the intro. The second paragraph in both DBQ or LEQ should really be the context paragraph, or what I sometimes call the background paragraph, where you talk about the background. The context is the background information that led to this point in time. Like, that's a critical piece, right? It got us there. This is how we got here. Now, that can be done in 2 to 3 lines kind of thing. You know, like, it doesn't have to be very long. But that I recommend to be its own paragraph. At that point is when I would start to say that the sort of extended intro, I'll call it, is actually done. You have 2 paragraphs finished. And this is where we start the body. Now, in the body, you've got paragraph 3, paragraph 4, and paragraph 5. Now, what you do with these paragraphs will be dependent very much on sort of the answer you're giving. Kind of a little bit of your own circumstance and so on. But in this paragraph, you should be taking each of the categories and creating a topic sentence based on a very, very close similarity to the categories of investigation above. So, just to kind of put a highlight on that, you take this and you repeat and you repeat. All your body paragraphs should be starting the exact same way with the exact same concept, okay? All of them. So you make a topic sentence based on the very close similarity to the categories of investigation above. Obviously, if you have 3 categories, one of them should go in body paragraph 3. I say body paragraph 3, I mean third paragraph of the essay. Okay, so intro, context, body number 1. So body 3, whatever, same thing. You go to the 4th paragraph, you should pick a separate category, and the 5th paragraph should be your last category. If you don't have 3 categories, and you only can figure out 2, move on and use the 2. You don't want to lose time because you're thinking about what to write. At some point, you have to write. Now, I would require and expect you to sit down and plan a little bit, 10 minutes, whatever it might be, but you do need to kind of get to it. That's the DBQ. So, sorry. I guess I should do it this way. Investigate. Victoria asks, what's the essay where you read the documents and split them into 2 different groups? Invent and provide your own groupings of documents, which is for the DBQ, and or categories of investigation, which would be how you handle the LEQ. The rest stays the same. Okay? The rest stays the same. So now, within that body paragraph, we have to do a few things. Thing number 1. Thing number 1. You must provide specific... Now, this is if... so let's do it this way. This is if we're talking about the DBQ. It'll be different for the LEQ, slightly. For the DBQ, you have to use specific information from the documents. That's job 1. Specific information from the documents. How would you group the documents? Well, it depends on the documents. So, for example, you want to look for common themes. You want to look for how they answer the thesis. So if I make a thesis like I did over here, that was something along the lines of think about how I want to answer it. So if I want to make a thesis about this, I need to group the documents to do that. I'd read all the documents. And if, for example, I'm making this up, I'm not going to read all the documents right now. If document 1 says the Mexicans should be free from Spaniards because the Spaniards are brutal conquerors, I don't know. And if there's another document that says Mexico should be free from Spain because the Spaniards they smell bad. The way you would group that is to say many forces calling for the independence of Mexico had a variety of reasons for demanding this change in policy, in British policy. That would have been a way to kind of split that up and take it on by having several points of view in it and sort of handling it with a more elegant fashion. That would be something like I would consider doing. So And that would give some room for the documents to tell me the story. Like, what did this... Yeah, exactly. You got to find a theme. You got to find a theme within each grouping, though. Not like an overarching theme to the essay, but within each grouping. So if documents 1, 3, and 7 are all about, again, how, I don't know, people are lazy and incompetent and therefore, or whatever, our overlords are bad. Find that theme within those 3 documents or things that support that idea. Okay, those are definitely how you want to group things if you can help it. Okay, so back to this. Okay, so that now you have to have specific information from the documents, and this serves as your evidence. And you really, really, really should explain the documents, the document inclusions. In other words, explain, I spelled document wrong, explain how your DBQ was crafted to get you to this point. In other words, something like, if I'm saying the Yankees are a better team than the Mets, and I have a bunch of documents to prove that, and I use a document that shows the Yankees have won more world championships than the Mets, I have to explain why I included this information into my argument. Yeah, I know they give me DBQ responses and requirements where I have to have a certain, certain amount of information or a certain topic. Like in this case, Mexican Revolution is chosen for me. Yeah, those limitations are there. But within those limitations, I have fairly broad latitude to do what I want to do, which is something we talked about as the strength of writing in general, that you can always do what you want to do. So make sure when you explain the documents, you also include that explanation of, here is this document, here is what it says. It is essential to my argument because it states, because it shows, because it demonstrates. And that's what you should do. Be very, 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 very direct. Have a chain. What they like to use as the phrase is students need to be able to demonstrate the chain of evidence that led them to their conclusion. And that's how you get the idea of plausibility. So if you have a chain, how do we cite documents during the DBQ? Real simple. So if I was going to write some information from a document, if I was going to write the lyrics to the song Cotton Eye Joe begin with the words, I guess. Where did you come from? If I do that, I would then just put after it document 1. That's how you cite it. Just like that. Document 2, document 3. No more than that. Now, should you include authors and things like that? I would avoid specific names of people. But you certainly could tell us who they are and what they are, because you might need to anyway. So, if someone's a Confucian scholar, if someone's a Muslim cleric, if someone's a Christian priest, and they're speaking in favor of religion, you should certainly at least note that to some degree. And you could say, all right, you don't need Father McGillicuddy. You could say, a Christian priest in document 1 states, and you could just do that. All right, so something like that would be just fine. Anything like that would be just fine. So this would make up more or less a full paragraph of information. You give us the actual information. You explain why you've chosen to use it in this way. How does this prove your point? In other words, when I say explain document inclusions, I know another way to say that is, how does this prove your thesis is worthy of thought? Like, how do we prove that this is actually sort of a thing that your thesis is worthy of consideration, that it meets that plausibility standard? Like, that's what you want to do. Do we have to use a quote from a document to use a group? I will say this once. I will say it again. I'm never going to stop saying it. At no point should you ever quote the document. I know I have a quote here. I just made this up in my head, all right? At no point should you ever quote a document. Ever, 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 ever. Do not do it. Do not do it. Do not do it. Do not do it. You don't want to quote from a document. All it proves that you can copy. Okay, so do not do that. All right, you can certainly paraphrase. That's fine. So read it and synthesize it and summarize it in your own head. That's perfectly okay. But do not think you're going to be able to get away with. Good. with copying. Copying does nothing but waste your time and prove to the grader you don't know how to write. Don't do it. A lot of students have a bad habit of doing it. Don't do it. And so this really needs to be the same case going forward here for these other things. All right, that's number one and number two. That's huge. This is how the whole essay is done. Should you just reference it? Yeah, you can do a direct reference. You can say in document 1. You can absolutely do that. And I wouldn't go crazy. I wouldn't go sticking sources in there and names of things, names of people, names of publications. You'll be writing for 10 years, and there's no point. Okay, so just put the actual direct reference in document 1. We see X, or bring the whatever information you need with you, and just put document 1 at the end, document 2 at the end, whatever the heck it might be, wherever you get your information, just put document at the end of it and be done with it. And then you're going to repeat this as is for topics 4 and 5, and that's the right way to handle the essay. Do you need a conclusion? Conclusions are always optional. You don't need them at all. Okay? So that's how you do the DVQ. The LAQ is not much different. The LAQ basically looks like this. The LAQ is something where instead of doing instead of doing this kind of grouping, which I don't know what's going on with these people as of a couple days ago, but regardless, instead of doing this kind of grouping for an LEQ, with the LEQ, what you would do is you would actually create themes of things like those categories. You're quite literally, will they take points off if we get to source? Well, all right, a couple things. So always paraphrase. Paraphrase is good. So Vivian asked about paraphrasing. That's good. Do it as often as you can. Victoria's asking, will they take points off if we forget to source? You don't get points off ever. You just don't earn points you otherwise would have earned. So you could absolutely check in, leave your stuff parked in the garage, and when the day is over, you're going to get nothing. If you don't bring any information with you, if you don't do anything with it, if you don't bring anything to the table, you're going to end up with no points. So you have to, at the end of the day, bring your stuff. So if you don't do the jobs, if you don't do the material, I think the question might be, maybe Victoria, you mean about something more like, what if you use document information? It is from document 1, but you forgot to say document 1. You forgot to write it. Theoretically, it's up to the grader to notice that you're using information from document 1. But don't do that. Don't forget. If nothing else, you have a checklist, right? You have to keep in your head a mental checklist of, I've used these many documents. So if nothing else, you want to be kind of keeping a paper record of sort of the fact that, okay, yes, I have document 1 here. Okay, I did document 3 there. I did document 4 there. I'm not going to do this document. I'm not going to do that document. I'll do these instead. And I would expect that that's something that you might be concerned about. But yeah, technically speaking, theoretically speaking, you shouldn't have to do any of that for them to grade it. They should just notice that this information is from document 1, but humans are humans and they're fallible. So you don't want to put anybody in that position where they have to make that call. It's not going to help you. It's not going to help them. So put it on there. Don't mess it up. And like I said, that's the whole thing. If I cut and paste this 1, 2, 3 into the 4 and 5 category, that's how you would fill out, in my opinion, your 3 body paragraphs. With all of that done, you would be pretty much ready to go for being graded. That would be what you'd have to do to sort of get graded on a minimal level. How well you did it would obviously be the determinant for how that goes. How well did you incorporate these documents? How well did you understand the documents? All that stuff's required. All right? That's basically it. Any other questions for now on writing this stuff? Because we'll come back to it, obviously, but it's already been an hour. I don't want to go too much longer. It's getting late for everybody. I imagine Andrew wants to go to bed. I know I'm getting a little tired myself, so talk to me. What other writing questions do we have about this? Anything I said that might have called something to mind or made you think of something? For intro, how would you write a grouping of documents? All right, so let's say it's a DVQ. And let's say the documents are all related to a high school student's academic performance, and you need to group a bunch of stuff. So it could be a report card, it could be whatever, awards they won, whatever it might be. So, no, I wouldn't do doc 1, 2, and 3 have a similarity because they all blah, blah, blah. I would not do that right now. What I would do is something like this. I would write your thesis the way you always done it. You present the argument, you explain your situation, etc. Then, when you go to group things, you would write something like the report card of Ray Tang, his performance at his NISMA solo, and his status as captain of the whatever golf team, all solidify his place in Shoreham society, whatever. Okay, now those three things I come up with, those categories, golf team, whatever, like the idea is that would be categories of the that's how you would list those groupings. All right, that's how I would do it. How should you source? Well, you shouldn't. We've been through that. If you're trying to get the sourcing point, you better be getting the other 5 points. You better be. And if you're not trying hard enough. All right. Sourcing is the hardest part of the test. I would actually recommend people often don't really try. Now, the rubric got a little bit more favorable towards it, but even then, I would still kind of not worry so much. The sourcing really depends upon the source because you have to choose. Do you want to discuss its point of view? Do you want to discuss the fact that, well, how do I phrase this? Do you want to discuss its point of view, what the purpose of it is, what the audience is? Some are better suited for things than others. It depends on the type of document. It's hard to know the point of view of something like a map, for example. Maps are pretty much a map. And evidence beyond the document should go in just like a document. So in the same way that you would incorporate the information from the documents, if you're going to pick a spot to put in information from beyond the documents, it needs to go into one of the other topics here. That would be how you would do it. So again, if I know Ray is whatever, also won some other awards, I would stick that right into one of the paragraphs where it seems to make the most sense for being on brand with other things we're talking about. Yeah. Can you do an example of evidence beyond document? I can. Ray, so in the intro paragraph, you'd list the evidences and then go into detail in those in your body paragraph, and then those by basically that's right. Basically that's correct. Can I do an example of beyond the documents? I probably could. Yeah, sure. Let me think. Evidence beyond the document would be something like, if we have a whole bunch of information about Ray's academic progress, but I also have, I don't know, a record of a phone call from his mom saying that he has been sleeping lately and that's why his grades are dropping, something like that. If that's something that exists and I know of it and I'm aware of it, and that phone call is not in any way, shape, or form made evident in the documents, I could just do that. I could just put that in, and I would again add it into these sorts of things. Add it right into one of the body paragraphs. It would go right into the section right here. Just add it in. Slip it in like you have another document you mean to add. Like imagine you're adding an imaginary document, which is simply being written in your brain by the information you already know. That's how I would do it. And I can show a specific example next time if you want to do that. Because we can look even at the student samples and see where they did it and where they didn't do it. All right, any other questions? All right, so why don't we call it now? It's been an hour. It's already late. Like I said, it's late even for me. Let's reconvene tomorrow in class. We'll look at some of this stuff, and then we'll see how the DBQ goes because you're going to be writing one this weekend. My favorite superhero is me, so we'll do that, and then come on Monday-ish, probably next week, Monday, Wednesday, maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, like that. We'll do 3 different streams to, again, keep us going, all right? But I expect there to be a lot of questions on the next stream about content because you're doing the actual AP take-home exam. We'll talk about that tomorrow in class, and I'll see y'all then. All right, guys, thanks for sticking it out. Bye.